Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We have MD Massey with us today as a part of our local author spotlight series. Mr. Massey is the author of the Paul and Nicole Paranormal Suspense series, of which he has recently released book 11, Druid Arcane. Welcome.
Well, I am glad to be here and welcome everybody who's shown up for this Zoom chat. So what we're going to do is I'm going to do a reading from Druid Master, the next book coming up. So you are going to be the first to hear the first chapter in Druid Master. And then I'm going to open it up for questions. So we'll just do kind of like an AMA. You know, you can pretty much ask me anything as long as it's related to my work and my books and so forth. All right. So if everybody would mute themselves out, I'll go ahead and get started with the reading. And before I begin this reading, I am going to start with the caveat that my pronunciation of Celtic names and proper nouns is very Texan and not very accurate. So be aware of that, okay? I leave all that to my narrator, and he does an excellent job. Stephen does an excellent job, as you know. Okay, so this is chapter 1 of Druid Master. There are a few things worse than losing your mentor, only to have them replaced by someone you despise. Granted, I knew that my mother loved me, somewhere deep down in that stone-cold heart of hers, that is. But as memories of my early life with her surfaced, so did all the feelings that had been repressed by the geas Finnegas had placed on me. The woman who sat before me at her kitchen table, sharpening a wicked-looking battle axe while she observed me with hard gray eyes, had never been a mother to me. Instead, she'd been more like a combination drill instructor, martial arts sensei, and prison warden. Which one I got depending on the day of the week and her moods. Sometimes she was a patient, almost kind teacher, and other times she was as hard and uncaring as an Arctic winter. From the time I could hold a blade, she'd trained me day in and day out in the art of war. And for a pudgy, sensitive boy who had lost his father at an early age, it was hell. Are you going to sit down or just stand there looking at me like I've grown a horn out of my forehead? She gestured at the chair opposite hers with a whetstone. Sit. Her tone brooked no argument, and with an annoyed sigh, I sat. Why all the deception? I mean, besides the fact that you were always mental. She gave a crooked, sarcastic grin that brought out the slightest hint of crow's feet around her deep-set almond eyes. Mom's features were simultaneously exotic and familiar, which was a strange thing to imagine until you saw her. The dark blonde hair that fell in loose curls around her face, the high cheekbones, Greek nose, cleft chin, and thin lips that were most often drawn into a disapproving frown. She looked a bit like a more muscular yet leaner version of Emily Blunt, the angel of Verdun with a harder edge. The olive drab fatigue pants and black tank top she wore did little to detract from the look, revealing her almost masculine shoulders and arms and slender waist. As far back as I could remember, she'd made a conscious effort to dull her good looks to avoid attracting notice from men. No makeup, loose clothes, the works. In all business, all the time. My mother, the Fomorian Ice Queen. Why do you think, she responded as she slowly drew the whetstone across the axe's edge. You were too sensitive, the seer said. And I was too harsh. He was worried that I would scar you emotionally. Besides that, we couldn't let the Fae know about your Riestrad, or they'd have killed you before your balls dropped. It didn't reveal itself until I was a teen. No, earlier, she said, lifting her chin to reveal a long, thin scar that ran down the side of her neck. I have the marks to prove it. Pushed you too hard one day in sparring and you snapped. Almost had to kill you, but Finnegas showed up and put you into a druid sleep. If you'd been grown, you'd never have managed it. Okay, somebody's opening up a package. You need to mute yourself out. Thank you. Okay, let me continue. Humph. Suddenly, I wish I remembered that day. You couldn't, as your Fomori side had taken over. That's when Finnegas demanded that he and that half-Kelpie take over your training. I asked him how he'd stop the same thing from happening again. He suggested yes, to make you forget. She chortled mirthlessly. For better than 10 years, I had to play the brain-addled mom around you. Fecking torture, but I gave my word. So, you two created a fantasy for me to live in until I became an adult. Finnegas made the right call. She gave me an appraising look before returning to the task of sharpening her blade. Kept your rampages to a minimum anyway. I gave a short, frustrated sigh. For the life of me, I don't know what Dad saw in you. He was a warrior through and through. That's what he saw in me, and I in him. Had he been a demigod like you, he'd have brought Underhill to its knees. Unfortunately, as a human, he was no match for the Four Dorha, hero blood or no. And where were you when the dark druid was trying to steal Dad's body? Where were you when he died? She slammed her axe down on the table. I was looking after you, whelp. I should have been at his side, but you were too soft. Too human? Aye, she said, settling back in her seat. Yet I was determined to prepare you for what we both knew was coming as best as I knew how. The Fomori way proved too harsh for you, especially after the loss of your father. So Finnegas took over and acted as a surrogate for Colm. And Maureen for you. She ignored that remark, but a twitch of her upper lip told me it stung. She was more of a mother to me than you could ever be. Mom raised her chin in defiance. I'll not deny it, but consider my upbringing. She paused, looking toward the front of the house with her mouth drawn in a grim smile. I stood half out of my chair because I knew that look. What is it? A messenger. There was a scratching at the door, then a familiar voice with a thick Jersey accent echoed down the hall. Yo, Druid, open up already. Mom stayed put with a knowing smirk on her face. The shrieked sound of her whetstone followed me down the hallway as I walked to answer the front door. When I opened it, Larry the Chupacabra sat on the welcome mat, his tongue lolling crazily to one side. Colin, no time to explain. We got a boogie, he said as he pushed past me into the house. That dude with the evil sword is on his way here. Which dude, I asked, as I followed Larry down the hall and into our kitchen. Hey, Leanne, he said with a wag of his tail as he passed her on his way to the fridge. He bumped the door open with his nose, and soon he was digging around inside. Ah, there it is. Wait a minute, you two know each other? The rat dog has his uses, Mom replied. He's stealthy, and he knows how to keep a secret. Larry tossed a box of vegan breakfast sausage out of the fridge and nudged the door closed. Ever since you fought that Dermot Mulroney guy, your mom's had me following his dad, tracking his movements and stuff. He's a pervy sucker, that guy. Really into hentai, not the usual smut, but that dark stuff. He means Angus, Mom said, sharpening her axe, not Don. I gathered as much, I replied in the snarkiest tone possible. Failing to get a rise, I turned to Larry. Tell me what you know. Well, he's still mega pissed at you, and he has that sword, and he's going to be here any minute. Larry held the box down with a forepaw as he ripped it open with his needle-sharp teeth. That's why we have to go. Now. Deciding Larry was probably right, I reached out for my connection to the oak. Nothing. Don't bother, Mom said. The seer spell blocks all magical communication at Farsight. It was a necessity to keep this place hidden, so you'll not be talking to your magic tree from here. Well, I could run out of range of the dampening field and then portal away, I said, trying not to sound overly salty. You could, but he'd just follow you. The young one has your scent now. Of course he does, I groused. Thanks, Larry. Hey, buddy, she tricked me. Not my fault your mom is Attila the Hun. Boudica would be a fair comparison, but I'll take that as a compliment, she replied, just a bit too smugly. Wait a minute, I said, crossing my arms as I glared at my mom. I thought this house was supposed to be the Switzerland of the world beneath or something. Doesn't that mean that Angus can't come here causing trouble? Mom tested the edge of her axe with the thumbnail. In a fashion, the truth is the seer placed a concealment spell on it that kept it mostly hidden from the Fae and the Two-a-Day. That spell also acts to keep them from trespassing here, but it began fading at the moment of his death. Fortunately, among their kind, only Niev knows of my presence, and we have an understanding of sorts that she will not reveal to me others of her kind. As far as the rest of them are concerned, I died long ago, and my spirit wanders somewhere on the other side of the veil. At that, another memory bubbled up from my subconscious. In it, my mom was shaking me by the arms, squeezing them so tightly that tears came to my eyes. I'd overheard a conversation between her and my dad in which she called her Ellen instead of Leanne. When I asked her why she did that or why he called her that, she flipped. You must never mention that name to anyone. Swear it, child. I snapped my fingers. Son of a bitch, they don't know you're my mother. If they did, you'd have been dead long ago, she said, rising from her chair as her eyes drifted to the front door. It's too late now. He's here. Why do I have the suspicion that you wanted him to find me here, I asked. Well, she did tell me to let Angus see me before I headed this way, Larry said through a mouthful of vegan sausages. Didn't you know you'd be here until I got to the door? I didn't know you'd be here until you got to the door and I smelled your bag. Stinks like rotten feathers. Did you know that? Great. My mother just set me up so I'd have to fight a god. I hung my head, rubbing the back of my neck before I looked at her. Any more surprises? Not today, she said. Now quit whining and go out the back door so you can start shifting. Take it the whole way, boy. Half measures will not do against the likes of Angus. He may not be the most powerful of the two a day, but he can be dangerous, especially when wielding moral talk. Stripping off clothes as I walked, I headed for the backyard, muttering curses all the while. As I grabbed the door handle, I whistled at the chupacabra. Hey, you coming or what? Despite his canine features, Larry managed to give a who me look. Seriously, if it's all the same, I think I'll stay right here and enjoy this premium bona fide soy byproduct. It's your fault I'm in this mess, so you're coming to watch my back. Go with them, Francamata, if you want to see our bargain through, Mom interjected with a stern look. Fine, but nobody better touch my sausage. Yeah, there's no risk of that, I muttered. Boy, Mom said, causing me to pause without looking back. You're not ready to face a god alone, yet. Just keep him distracted from me for a time. Two things. One, I became a man while you were shirking your parental responsibilities. And two, I did just fine against Belaster. The Jotun chieftain was not the equal of Angus, despite having common parentage with the trickster. It takes more than breeding to make a god, and more than killing to make a man. Even after all these years, the woman was incapable of holding a simple conversation without criticizing me. I decided to take the high road and ignore her last remark. So basically, keep him busy and don't die, I asked. If you did, you'd not be worthy to be my son, she replied matter-of-factly. Now go. The seer spell is weakening, and soon Angus will find the house. My final response to her instructions was a disgusted grunt, shifting as I exited off the back deck into the yard. A half minute or so later, I was in my full Fomorian form. It hurt like hell to shift, as usual, and I was still 10 foot nothing of ugly as F, kind of a cross between Quasimodo and Paul Bunyan. But I was a hell of a lot more resilient in this form, and if I had to fight a god, I'd need every advantage I could get. About the time I finished the transformation, I heard what would otherwise be a pleasing tenor voice shouting in taunting tones from the front of my mother's house. McCool, come out, you wee prick, and take your medicine. So I had to fight a god. Well, maybe I didn't have to fight him, but in this case, I found myself agreeing with my mom in what was one of those, I'm sorry, the typo. I may as well get this over with situations. Damn it, but I'd forgotten how much I disliked her. It wasn't hate because she was my mom, but she sure knew how to chat my ass. That was for certain. We're burning daylight here, Druid, Larry said from somewhere nearby. Wherever there was danger to be found, the Chupacabra did his invisibility act. Admittedly, it came in handy as he was the better at doing recon than any other supernatural creature I'd met. If only he wasn't so cowardly, but I could hardly blame him considering his other abilities or lack thereof. Larry, is he carrying that sword? I asked as I rummaged around in my craneskin bag. You mean the sentient sword that's 110% batshit crazy? The one that never shuts up? The thing that carries on 24/7, 365 about slicing up babies and making lace from the entrails of old enfeebled women? That would be the one, I replied, as I found what I needed. I grabbed it in a reverse grip, hiding the handle inside my massive right fist and tucking the blade behind my arm. One of the challenges of facing down a god was that they had access to all the best loot. In this case, Angus carried Moral Talk, the Great Fury, a sword that never missed its mark once swung. Not to mention that he was a god and by all accounts a highly accomplished warrior. That was a problem because highly accomplished meant something entirely different when you were dealing with immortal beings who could spend centuries honing a particular skill. They hadn't called him the Red-Armed for nothing, after all. I had a plan for the sword, but regarding his legendary skill in battle, I'd be winging that one. After queuing up a few highly specific spells, I released a frustrated sigh before heading through the side yard for the front of the house. You sure you want to do this? Larry's disembodied voice asked from my left. He was smart enough to know not to stand on my strong side. I'd give him that. No, but I'm doing it anyway, I said. Druid, Angus bellowed as I rounded the front of the house. Are you craven? Come out and face the music. Or run if you're a coward. I'll merely hunt you down for sport. Makes no difference to me. Strangely, the god was dressed much as he'd been at my duel with Deermood. Every bit the wealthy businessman, save for the late Bronze Age Celtic longsword in his hand. He wore a gray pinstripe three-piece suit, a lavender shirt with matching tie and pocket square, and wingtip shoes. He wore his golden hair long, as many gods did, but pulled back in a neat ponytail to reveal his supernaturally enhanced facial features. Piercing blue eyes, good cheekbones, strong clean-shaven jaw. The guy could have been on the cover of GQ or the lead in an action movie franchise. Yep, I definitely hate him. I noted with interest that Angus couldn't see me, although I stood a mere 15 feet away. Apparently, Finn's obfuscation spell was holding on, despite his departure from the mortal plane. Switching the blade I held to my left hand, I reached in my bag and drew Guy Deerig, the red spear, which I'd kept as the spoils of battle after slaying Diarmuid Udovna, Angus's adopted son. He had kidnapped my girlfriend after all, and mind-raped her to boot. By all counts, he hadn't sullied her physically, but to a werewolf with alpha tendencies, the mental domination may have been worse. As a condition of agreeing to the duel, I demanded that he release Fallon, whether I won or lost. I won, but I hadn't seen her since, and her absence had left a gaping hole in my life that I still hadn't filled. That Pyrrhic victory was apparently why Angus wanted to kill me, although Diarmuid had already died once due to Finn McCummell's willful neglect. And his adopted father had sent him to kill me in the first place. It was all very confusing, trying to keep track of who wanted me dead and why. Honestly, I was at the point where I was ready to start dropping bodies just to clear the field a bit. The good thing about the red spear was that it caused wounds that could not be healed. Damn thing had nearly killed me after my fight with Diarmuid, several times in fact. I figured if I could square hit on Angus, that might turn the tide enough so I could steal an easy victory. I had a hell of a time beating his adopted son, so I could only imagine how a fair fight with the father would go. Balancing the spear in my mighty right hand, I drew back and cut loose for all I was worth. And that was a lot in this form. When in my full Fomorian form, I could bench press a Buick without breaking a sweat, outrun a pronghorn buck, a fact which I'd tested at a local wildlife preserve, and shrug off hits from a small caliber pistol without so much as leaving a mark. By my estimate, the spear flew toward Angus at roughly 300 feet per second, about as fast as a crossbow bolt. Having trained with the spear since I was young, my aim was dead on. The spear split the air with barely a sound, so sharp was the leaf-shaped blade at its tip. As it crossed the magical barrier where the old man's spell ended, I held quite a large amount of hope that it would hit its mark. Angus appeared to be distracted and looking the other way, and at that velocity and distance, there was no way Guy Deerig could miss. Yet, a millisecond before the spear landed between his shoulder blades, he spun Moral Talk behind his back, deflecting Guy Deerig so it buried itself deep in the asphalt of the street beyond. The maneuver itself looked like a trick of the eye, as he had managed to flourish a longsword in such a way as to fend off an attack on his flank. If I hadn't seen it myself, I would not have believed it to be possible. I stood with my mouth agape as Angus's head swiveled around. My actions must have broken the spell, because immediately he fixed me with the sort of mad look that comic book artists and actors reserve for the most insane of character depictions. "Ah, there you are, my sweet," he crooned in an almost soothing voice. "Come and meet your end, why don't you then? I won't swear it'll be painless, but I do promise it'll be quick." And that's that, chapter 1. All right. So I guess we can open up for questions now. If anybody wants to comment on the first chapter of the story, tell me what you think. I'm always happy to hear feedback. And, it's still in the writing and editing phase, although I'm working hard to get it out to you guys before Christmas. So we'll see how that goes. Anyone have any questions? Or can you not mute yourself? Unmute yourself. Let's see here.
Can you hear me?
There we go. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I enjoyed the first chapter. Are you going to read more?
That's all I'm going to read today. I'm not going to read any more. Just the first chapter, just enough to spark your interest, whet your appetite. So
I'm looking forward to it.
Well, good. What do you think about Colin meeting his mother, or I guess Bree meeting his mother, and then facing off with Angus?
It's awesome. And I look forward to hearing more about his mom.
Good. Yeah, you'll see quite a bit of her.
That should be interesting.
Yeah, she's a bit of a mystery, so you'll see quite a bit of her in the book. So
that was my thought as well.
Okay.
Anxious to see more of what's happening with mom.
Yeah.
Been quite the mystery.
Yeah, she's a bit of an enigma because she is his mother. Obviously, she loves him, but she's Fomorian and very warlike society. you know, and obviously, you know, because of the hatred between the Tuatha and the Fomorians, you know, those Fomorians that were left, you know, they kind of, you know, carved out their own niches here and there. And, you know, she's been in hiding, which you'll find out in the first and second chapter of the book. So as she said, nobody knows that she's alive. So, yeah, she's, as you'll find, you know, that Colin doesn't have the best relationship with his mother. And it shows throughout the book. So.
You could kind of tell in the first chapter that things
Put it
weren't going to
mildly.
go well.
Yeah. You know, yeah, he has some mommy issues, that's for sure. So he works those out over the course of the book, which is, you know, which is gonna be kind of fun. It's built-in conflict, which is great. And there's no better conflict than family conflict. So makes it easy to write. Anybody else? Anyone who wants to jump in with a question, feel free to jump in. Happy to take your questions or comments or whatever.
So I assume at some point you're also going to tell us in the story how Larry knows mom. He seems to know a lot of people.
Yeah, well, you know, okay, so Larry's the type of character, nobody ever knows where he is, really. Nobody ever knows if he's around or not because he's so good at hiding, right?
Right.
So, and he ends up sticking his nose in a lot of different people's business, but he's taken quite the interest in Colin because he considers Colin to be his friend. Colin bailed him out, you know, with his issue with his zombie ex-girlfriend. You know, if you read that short story, if you hadn't, it's in the last short story collection. And
I have them.
yeah, so good. So Larry, you know, he's the type of character that he kind of has his nose in everyone's business without people knowing it. And you'll find that his ability to pop up in you know, in different stories with different characters is going to increase as time goes on and we start doing spin-off series. So yeah. Now, I don't know if you guys know this, but this book 12, I'm actually ending Colin's first series, and we're going to start a fresh new series with Colin after this 12th book. I don't know if you guys were aware of that or not. So it's not going to be the end of Colin's story. It's just that I'm starting a new series, and I'm going to introduce some fresh characters and fresh settings and so forth, and put Colin, you know, kind of move him in a new direction. And the reason I did that, or that decided to do that, is because I wanted to have multiple entry points into my series, because the series was getting so long. You know, it's like what happens is you'll lose readers in the middle of a series. Like they'll start reading it and they get around to book, you know, like 6 or 7, and they're like, oh my gosh, the people lose interest. So I decided to go ahead and cap this series at 12 and then go ahead and start a new series. So you guys can look forward to seeing more Colin after this, but a couple things are going to happen to him. He's going to go back to the Hellpocalypse for one. He feels like he has unfinished business there. So you'll see that.
Yeah, well, he does have unfinished business there.
Yeah, he does. And you know, it's funny because somebody was asking, they were commenting on the website. They were like, I don't understand. Like, you know, the stuff that happened in Colin's books, you know, means that the Hellpocalypse could have never happened. And that means Scratch could never exist. And I had to explain, you know, there were 2 different timelines. And so, you know, we're working on the infinite worlds theory here, which is, you know, a bit cliche, but it's fun to play with. So, yeah. All right. Ken here says, okay. Cindy says, I've not read you before, but I really enjoyed the first person perspective. Thank you. I appreciate that. A lot of urban fantasy is written in first person perspective. It seems to be kind of common for the genre. And I think a lot of readers of urban fantasy prefer the first person perspective. Although, you know, I don't know if you've read any of Joe Nassis's work, but he tends to write, I believe, in third person. And he says that's where he's most comfortable. So I think it's kind of the author's preference. I find it easy to get inside a character's head when I'm writing in first person, but I do enjoy breaking out of that in order to write in third person limited, and also, you know, other, you know, points of view. But I think third person limited lends itself best to this genre. Yeah, it's kind of good to stretch my writing legs that way sometimes. Ken says I'm still working through your books, so I enjoyed the reading. Unfortunately, I have an online tutoring session. Oh, that's too bad, Ken. I'm sorry you had to tap out, but this is going to be posted. I'll post I know Ken's not here, obviously, but this link is going to be posted so you guys can watch it later if you have to tap out early. Cindy says, so as a new reader, where do you suggest I begin in your books? Well, I will tell you, you can start off, there is actually a book for free that you can get on my website at mdmassey.com. It's actually like if you sign up for my newsletter, you're going to get a link to that book. I would say that's Druid Blood, which is the first book that I wrote, believe it or not. And it was horrible when I first wrote it. And my editor and I, my editor she's working a PhD in literature. I believe I want to say, I forget. It's like some period literature. I don't know what, medieval literature, I think. But she actually enjoys my books, and she loves to read them. As a matter of fact, she tells me a lot of times she has to edit twice because she gets in the story and starts reading and she forgets to edit. So she's got to go back and edit. But she really helped me clean up that book quite a bit. And it's a good introduction to the character and story and settings. There's also another free book that you can get. And that book is Blood Scent. And that is a prequel. I think it's a much better prequel than Druid Blood. And that one's also for free. What I'll do is I'll post the link for that on my Facebook page, which is MD Massey author on Facebook. And I'll put it in my newsletter too. If you go to the website, you sign up for the newsletter, I'll put that link in the newsletter so you can get it. Because I only give it away through BookFunnel and a couple other places, and it's kind of hard to find. But yeah, you can get that one for free too. Or I think you can buy it on Amazon, Blood Scent, for 99 cents. So those are both good places to start. Or you can start with Junkyard Druid. Junkyard Druid is the first book in the 12-book series. And it's usually, I think, where most people start with that character. Although that book is, it's a little different than the other books. I try to do something kind of interesting with that book, in that I have two different stories running throughout the book. One story is told through journal entries, and the other story is told in first person. And some people like that approach, some people don't like it. So, but that would be the first place to start in the series if you're interested in just jumping right into the main story. All right. So, any other questions? Anybody else have anything they want to ask?
Did you feel any pain in getting rid of Finnegas?
As far as what happened to him?
Yeah, as he came to the end of his arc in the story.
It was hard. It was tough. And I'll tell you, it was tough for multiple reasons. Number one, you become attached to your characters. Number two, the themes that we were working with, or that I was working with in that story, relating to, a father-son relationship and, kind of like a father wound and loss. They were very difficult for me at that time because while I was writing that book, I lost my dad. My dad passed away due to COVID. And that was right in the middle of me writing that book. So there's a lot in that book, a lot of emotion that came out in that book that is genuine, that came from a very genuine place. So yeah, it was difficult. I got to say I'm very pleased with how the book came out, but man, it was difficult to write. There were times when I had to just set it aside and I couldn't touch it for days. And then I have to go back to it and work through it. It was a process. So yeah. And even without the personal issues that happened during that time, I believe I still would have had difficulty, but he had to, I had the plan all along, at some point this character, and I foreshadowed it like 5 or 6 books before, right? At some point this character was not going to be with us anymore. And it was necessary because it's necessary for Colin's growth. He has to become his own man and his own master druid, as you will. So yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So here's a question.
Sure.
Because I noticed that Moral Talk showed back up again.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen that sword in other urban fantasy books, like the Iron Druid.
Yeah.
I mean, where are you getting your research that everybody has these connections with these magical items attached to these specific people?
Right. So it's Celtic mythology, and Celtic mythology is interesting because the Celtic culture, the Celtic peoples, they mostly transmitted their knowledge, their folklore, and so forth through oral means, right? So it was passed down through storytellers, and it wasn't until the Christians came along that they started going about, and actually it was monks that went out and started documenting this folklore and these stories. And so the mythology is very fragmented. in the sense that you'll find characters that were married to this person in these stories and married to somebody else in these stories, and this person was a son of this person in this story, and they were, they had other parents in another story. Very confusing, but also very rich. So if you think about it, then you think about most of the urban fantasy that's written, right? A lot of the urban fantasy that's written, for example, especially in YA urban fantasy, is based on Greek mythology. And everybody knows Greek mythology. So when you're dealing with Greek mythology, nobody would think twice, or Arthurian mythology, for instance. Nobody would think twice about two different authors writing two different stories, two different fiction novels based on Arthurian mythology. Unfortunately, Celtic mythology isn't as well known outside of Ireland. So it's becoming more well known because there are more authors like me that are delving into that folklore and so forth, and using it for storytelling. But I think that's why people see it and they're like, you have a character. I remember, somebody told me when the books first came out, this is a very common criticism I had, that people said I was copying Jim Butcher because I had a character named Queen Maeve, which that's a very common. Maeve is a common character, yeah, and so on and so forth. So in Celtic mythology, Angus Og, he was gifted that sword. It was given to him, and I can't remember if it came from Inanimate or not. I'm not sure, but it's something. It's like in legend. It's one of it's one of the swords that that Angus is known to have. He had Red Fury. He had Great Fury, he had Little Fury, he had Red Spear and Yellow Spear, and those were like his wait, no, I take that back. Red Spear and Yellow Spear belonged to Dermot. But anyway, those were weapons that he had. So that's kind of the source material. And the weird thing is, like, you can, I've got a ton of books like these, just sitting around my office. I've got like a whole bookshelf with Celtic mythology, and I read through this stuff. First place I'll usually go is where everybody goes, which is Wikipedia, because that kind of gives you a general direction for your research. And then I'll start delving into the books that I have in my own library. And that's usually where I find my source material.
What would be your favorite Celtic mythology book that you use?
Man, one I use a lot, and I'm going to look here on my desk and see if I have it, see if I can pull it out. So this one I just got. This is the Element Encyclopedia of the Celts, and it's very good. This was actually recommended to me by one of my readers in I think in my reader group. But this one is very good. It's very useful because it has it has a lot of it has a lot of obscure stuff in it and explained in a very clear manner. Before that, prior to that, what I used quite a bit, and I'm looking to see if I have it out here somewhere. Yeah, here it is. So I used James McKillop's book, which is the Oxford Dictionary of Celtic Mythology. And this one's very good, but it's not as easy to read. It's not as readable. It's written in a very academic manner. And so I actually prefer this Element Encyclopedia a lot better. I think I think it's a more accessible book.
Yeah, I had a couple books on Celtic mythology. Yeah, just to try and get background with all of these books that I was reading that included it. And it was like slogging through mud. So perhaps something you have might be a little easier to go through.
Yeah, the thing is that a lot of the translations are difficult to read because a lot of the classic stories, they were written in, the 18th century. And I believe, one of the large collections of Irish mythology, at least, was a sort of compilation anthology, if you will, that was written by Keats. And there was another author, a female author, and I can't remember which, but she was an historian that collected a bunch of stories and compiled them into a book. And, there were several authors that produced similar works. With the purpose of retaining, making sure that knowledge, that folklore wasn't lost. But the language is kind of archaic, and it's hard to read. It's not like when I was a child and I read, Greek and Arthurian myths, and you could find tons of books that were written in, in modern nomenclature, kind of with you know, in modern language, much easier to read than that stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, because I'm doing an Irish language course now, and the instructor gives us short stories to read and listen to and try and learn how to say things.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I've stepped into like the third year of this course. That's how difficult it is.
Yeah.
And then he'll give us an English translation, but it's like a direct translation.
Mm-hmm.
So all the words are out of order. And when you're reading English out of order,
mm-hmm.
you're looking at like, what? And you
Yeah.
can read it 4 or 5 times, and really, you're still trying to figure out what he's trying to say because it makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, because the syntax is different, and you know that would be a challenge. I'm like, why would he do that? But I guess he's trying to get you to learn the words, you know, directly.
If he would teach us how to say it,
mm-hmm.
as opposed to read it and spell it, it might be easier, maybe.
Well, pronunciation.
You talked about the pronunciation in the beginning of your talk.
It's a difficult thing.
It is. There's so many weird things with it.
Yeah, and what's interesting is if you go on sites like I believe Forvo.com is one where you can find, you know, different user generated or user submitted pronunciations for various words, and you can find some words on there that are familiar words to my readers, you know, like you know, proper names and so forth. And you'll hear, you know, there will be 5 or 6 different pronunciations on there from people that, you know, are obviously from Ireland, and you can hear slight differences in the way that they pronounce many of these words. Sometimes the differences are very, very drastic.
Yeah.
So,
go to a website called tanglin.ie.
Yes. Yeah.
And they give the Connacht, the Ulster, and I forget the other one. And some of them are very similar. You can barely hear the change in the pronunciation. And then others are like, whoa.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and as I said, my pronunciation is terrible. I leave it up to my narrator, Steven, to figure that stuff out. He does a pretty good job. He does a pretty decent job. But, you know, I will say that that on occasion I've had people, some of my readers from the UK, you know, they've kind of given us grief over certain things. But I'm like, well, you know, we try, you know. He's one person doing multiple voices in every book. So you got to cut him some slack.
Yeah.
And I'm one of those.
Yeah, I'm one of those people. When you put a word in there that I don't know how to pronounce, I have to find the pronunciation or I stumble over it and it slows down my reading.
Yeah. Well, you can tell like when I was reading that first chapter, you know, even to this day, because when I first started reading these myths, you know, I pronounced McCool wrong in my head, and I did it for years, and I still stumble over that because I'm reading it, you know, I pronounce it phonetically in my head. So so it's, you know, I'm kind of the same way. Although I will say, I don't know if you saw the meme that I posted in the group not too long ago about the girl said when you come across a word that, you know, or name you can't pronounce in a book, and for the rest of the book you just pronounce it like a garbled mess in your head, you know, just so you get through it. Yeah, so I do that quite often, even when I'm writing. So
it makes it a little bit harder, doesn't it? A little more challenging.
It does, but it's, you know, that's part of the fun, right? You know,
like I need my wolfhound Orla, and it sounds like uppercase O, uppercase R, L-A. But it's O-R-L-A-I-T-H.
Gotcha.
Which is a little bit different. So people are always calling her odd names at the vet.
Yeah.
They're lucky I didn't choose one of the other names I really like, because I really thought of Aoife. And it's a beautiful name, but it's A-O-I-F-F-E.
Yeah.
Now, how do you get Aoife out of that unless you're Irish?
Yeah, that reminds me of what is the Irish actress? I'm trying to think of her name, and everybody's always mispronouncing her name.
Siobhan?
There you go. Yeah. Is she? Oh, she gets hot about that, doesn't she?
Yeah, after a while.
Understandably.
Yeah, I saw her.
You would.
Yeah, I saw her on a talk show, and boy, she was a little bit peeved about it. You know, she's like, "Why can't people get my name right?"
Well, some late night talk show, and they had a young lady on there, and to this day, I cannot remember how to pronounce her name because it was like this long, but it sounded like this. That's all I can remember about it. And she spelled it for everybody, and she talked everybody through it. But for that brief moment, I had it. Show went off. I tried to tell my husband. Couldn't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as I said, admittedly, I stumble through pronouncing these names, and I don't know. I mean, um, I guess that, my process is that I spend as much time as I need to on research and no more, simply because, I would like to spend more time on research and be a little bit more detailed. But I'll be honest, the way that Amazon works when you're an independent author, you're not getting advances, so you eat what you kill. And, I have to get books out, on a relatively, at a relatively rapid pace, every 3 to 4 months. If I don't get a book out every 3 to 4 months, readers forget about you. They move on to other series. The Amazon algorithm, which recommends your books, the recommendation algorithm will forget about you and they'll quit recommending your books, and so on and so forth. So there are, kind of some limitations on how much research I can do out of necessity. I have to, cap it at a certain amount. But, I would say that probably leads to some errors too, as people have found. But, I guess that's all part of the process. So.
I think some authors like Nora Roberts, she has a bunch of trilogies that are magic oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And I swear that the first couple you think, oh wow, this is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then like by the 7th or 8th or 9th, you realize she has some sort of planned out outline or formula.
Mm-hmm.
And it really doesn't matter who the characters are or what's going on. It's the same outline.
Mm-hmm.
But she puts out books. She's got her trilogies. She's got her Nora Roberts name and J.D. Robb.
Mm-hmm.
And I much prefer the J.D. Robb because they're growing.
Yeah.
Other ones just seem to be stuck.
Yeah. Well, I will say that my books, the way that I plot my books, it's very much based on the hero's journey, because that's kind of the type of story, that type of epic story that people expect out of an urban fantasy series. And I'm looking at developing different characters that have been supporting characters in Collins Universe, so I can tell stories in ways that are a bit different, or that possibly break from that type of structure. But one of the things you have to be aware of as an author of commercial fiction is that readers will say, even in that poll that I did in my readers group last week, people will say that they want an interesting premise, that they want something new. But in reality, readers look for books that are familiar to them. They look for familiar tropes, familiar character archetypes, familiar settings, familiar magic systems, things of that nature, familiar creatures and so forth, because that's what they're used to. And when somebody comes to, they come to enjoy a certain genre and a subgenre within that genre, they want more of the same. So you have to be kind of careful about experimentation. And that's a hard lesson that I learned with my first series, with the Scratch Sullivan series, was that I tried to do something unique. I noticed that all of the zombie apocalypse books were written from a scientific, a kind of perspective, that the zombie was created, and explained scientifically. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting if we had a paranormal zombie apocalypse? And so that's what I wrote. And what I found very quickly is that readers of Zompoc fiction, they didn't want that. They don't like paranormal. They don't like paranormal zombies. They want zombies that can be explained by science, more or less. And readers of paranormal fiction don't like zombie apocalypse books. So, yeah.
I'm not big on zombies in general.
Yeah.
Just
and a lot of people aren't.
Zombie. But.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people aren't. So that series, although I really enjoyed writing it, and I was kind of learning as I wrote it too. I was learning the craft as I wrote that series, but it was very difficult to market. And that's one of the reasons why I ended up writing the Colin McCool series. I had written, my very first book was that Druid Blood book, which was originally written as a YA novel, Colin McCool and Vampire Dwarf. And so I had the character in the back of my head, and I really liked the character. And I got to the third book in the Scratch Sullivan series, and he kind of wrote that character, and he kind of wrote himself in, as I say, but I decided to include the character as part of the story arc. And then he was fun to write as an adult. So that's why I decided to start writing that series. And, here we are, 12 books later. and 3 or 4 short story collections as well. But, you know, I will say that Scribe Sullivan's books, I would like to go back and write more about those characters, you know, continue that series. But I just don't think that, you know, the books just don't sell, you know, they just don't. Even though I have dedicated readers for those books in that series, they just don't sell like the Colin Cool books do.
Yeah, we miss our characters when they disappear from us.
I feel the same way. What Harry Connolly writes the, 20 Palaces series. And he was kind of a victim. He's a very talented urban fantasy author and fantasy author. And he wrote that series as kind of like, I describe it as grimdark urban fantasy. So if you're familiar with the grimdark subgenre of epic fantasy, in grimdark novels, everything and everybody is bad and ambiguously moral. You know, the morality is always ambiguous. And so that's kind of how he wrote that series. And I think that his publisher really didn't understand how to market it because eventually, you know, just kind of petered out. And they were really very good books. So recently he decided to do a GoFundMe to fund a new book in that series and self-publish it. And man, I got so excited because, you know, when that series went away, I was just devastated because it was so interesting. You know, he writes very, very realistic characters and it's really gritty. You know, it has kind of this noir feel to it. And, you know, the way he deals with, because in his world, there's a magic system, right? But the whole magic, everything's based on Lovecraftian mythology. And so the way he deals with that, Lovecraftian mythology it's very, very good. You know, he does it really, really well. The atmosphere is perfect for that. So, yeah, I agree with you. When those characters and those stories and those worlds go away, yeah, we don't like that very much.
And I like to see them grow and evolve. But then I also want to go back and have the backstory, you know. So like with like the Harry Potter books, you know all about Harry and his trials and tribulations. And he grows throughout the story and they had to kill off Dumbledore like you killed off Finnegas. But then you wonder, well, what was happening? You get bits and pieces of what happened to his parents that caused all of this to occur. But let's go back and do them too. I mean, we did Star Wars in reverse. Why not?
Yeah. You know, I was kind of curious about that myself, about why J.K. Rowling decided to do the Fantastic Beasts thing instead of going back and telling the stories that were pre-Harry Potter. It seems like, I don't know, maybe she was tired of those stories or something and she wanted to do something new, which I understand. But.
She tried to do an independent book. And I tried to read it because I love the Potter series, but it was draggy and it just nothing.
Was that the one she wrote under a pen name?
Huh?
Was that the one she wrote under a pen name?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I remember when that happened. Yeah, so
I did not like that one at all, and it surprised me because I really expected.
Yeah, well, you know, some authors are capable of jumping from genre to genre and you know, switching gears and writing under different pen names and so forth. And some of us can't. You know, it's just, you know, I think some people, they kind of find their groove and that's, you know, kind of where they need to stay.
Yeah.
I'm sticking personally myself. I'm sticking with urban fantasy and paranormal suspense simply because I can do shared world books that you know, that give my established readership more of the stuff that they want, you know, and so that's what I'm trying to do. Heard somebody about to jump in with a question, so I'll show.
I was just going to say, I think that she did very well with the Robert Galbraith series. That it is so very different from Harry Potter. I think she's a good writer. That's me. I've gone.
Yeah, well, you know. And
I just couldn't get into it though.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know what the deal was.
Yeah, I will say that I think I read the first Harry Potter book and I really thought it was really neat. I thought that the world that she created was so unique and you know, so immersive. I was kind of in awe of it. I didn't read the rest of the series simply because it wasn't really my thing. But my wife my wife read them all and she loved them. You know, I just ended up watching the movies because it wasn't my thing, but I watched the movies with her.
Yeah, well, the last two movies did not follow the books at all.
Really? Is that a
Really.
fact?
It's a fact.
Yeah, I didn't
Trust me,
think
I
you would.
read all the books at school to the children.
Uh-huh.
I ran all the school book fairs, and I said, that doesn't sound like a good book to me.
Yeah.
But then they had them at the school book fair and the kids wanted to read it.
Mhm.
So part of the time we separated from selling to actually reading some of the books out loud or portions of them.
Mhm.
And we started reading Harry Potter one night. And by the end of the week, we had finished the entire book. The kids kept coming to the book fair just so I would read them the book.
Yeah. That's
So,
interesting. That's the way I was with Rick Riordan's books. Those really appealed to me. Another great YA series. But yeah, I got to say, as far as going back again to J.K. Rowling, the world that she created was, she did a really, really good job of world building, and that's something that it's difficult to do. That's some of the hardest work in writing a fantasy series is the world building.
yeah,
Creating
I
a world
agree.
that's dynamic and believable.
Yeah, did you read Christopher Paolini's books?
Yeah, when they first came out, I was so intrigued by the idea that, this young guy had written these books. And I read the first one and the second one, and then I didn't read anything after that. But yeah, he was one of the first success stories in independent publishing. I think Paolini actually, I think he was a bit of my inspiration, to tell you honestly. Because I thought about it, and when you read the story about how his parents marketed his books, truly, truly interesting. I think they sold 40,000 books just, based, out of the back of a car, more or less. So interesting stuff.
Yeah, they were really good. His world creating was like spot on. It almost gave you too much information because, you would be overwhelmed sometimes. But the fact that at that young age, he was able to do the world, do the languages, all these different types of characters was just so amazing.
Yeah, I remember enjoying those books quite a bit. And, when those books came out, that was back in the day when bookstores were still really a big thing, where you could go to a bookstore and browse. And, I miss my bookstores. I miss my Borders books in Austin. There was a good Borders books in Austin, in North Austin, near the Domain. And I used to go there all the time. And yeah, when it closed, I was like, oh, I was devastated. But yeah, those
Stores and
books
libraries, best places on earth.
Yeah. Thank goodness for libraries. That's a fact for sure. Yeah. They were, libraries were really honestly kind of like my savior when I was a kid. So, I used to, when we'd go on summer vacation, I always get left at my grandmother's house. And this was in a small town in South Texas. And, everybody down there spoke Spanish but me. My mother didn't teach us to speak Spanish because she was afraid that we would have accents. And she was, because she had a horrible time, with like going to college and stuff back in the 60s, and in Texas, in a hick town. So, I felt kind of ostracized, and I would just spend all my time, reading. So my mom would take me to the library. I remember it was the summer after the second grade. I remember going and finding all these books of mythology and stuff, right? And I grabbed the Iliad and the Odyssey, and I'd bring this big pile of thick books and put them up on the counter. And I'm like, I just finished second grade, I was a kid. And the librarian, he just looks at me and is like, you need to put all those books back. Mom was like, no, trust me, he's going to read them. Even if it takes him forever, he will read them. And so, this librarian was amazed. But that was my life.
The same thing. We had a bookmobile come through the neighborhood every Monday.
Yeah.
And I would go and I would take out stacks of books. And the bookmobile lady would look at me and she's like, well, those are way too old for you. I said, no, they're not.
Yeah.
She said, well, okay, read it to me. And I did. And then she let me take out whatever I wanted after that.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that's great.
I love those stories.
I miss those scholastic book fairs too. My kid will still, take money to school to get books and stuff, and we encourage it. So
yeah, I ran 26 of those book fairs.
Oh,
when I was at the elementary, middle school. So
yeah. I always
love them.
Yeah, that was like the best thing.
Where all my babysitting money went when I was a kid.
Why not? Yeah, I was lucky enough. My mom bought me books, but. Okay, so we're coming up on 4:00, so I want to make sure that we open the floor up again to let anybody who hasn't asked a question yet to ask their question. If there's anybody who wants to jump in and chat or whatever, Cindy had to sign off. So, I know some other people are kind of, looking at signing off. So if anybody has a question, jump in real quick. And if not, we'll get Kaylee to close it out.
Mr. McCool?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry, Massey.
There you go.
I see you're wrapping up. You said you're wrapping it up with this book, but I'm curious too. You like most of your characters. I'm kind of excited about some of the spinoffs. Are you still wanting to put a couple of spinoff books together for some of their short stories?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, we're going to do. I'm going to do slightly shorter novels, I think, than what I've done with Colin's series. Colin's books run typically between 70,000 and 90,000 words. And a lot of fiction authors that write urban fantasy tend to write books that are about 50,000. And they tend to get books out more quickly that way, which I understand. So I'm going to experiment with that. I have a series planned for Crowley. And I have another series planned for Crowley and Belladonna to do a team up. Nice. And then I have a series planned for Fallon as well.
Oh, good. I was hoping.
Yeah. So those are the three characters I'm going to play with next. And then after that, and I might do this beforehand because I'm developing the idea, but I don't know if you've read both series, but Tony Mendoza shows up in both series, right? So he shows up in Gabby's run as Gabby's uncle in the Scratch Sullivan series. And that kind of, that was kind of like an offshoot story that kind of told some backstory for Gabby. And in Colin's world, Tony Mendoza is the guy that is in charge of Cerberus, the federal agency, the law enforcement agency that's been tasked with investigating paranormal happenings and whatever. And so there's something that happens to Tony in between his appearance in Colin's books and his appearance in Scratch's timeline, and he changes quite a bit. He gets altered quite a bit and becomes a totally different person. So I'm thinking about writing an urban fantasy kind of law enforcement series featuring Tony and telling that story. So that's another one that I kind of have planned too. So yeah.
Well, with your personal background, that would actually make sense. It's really cool.
Yeah. I think it'll be fun because I'll also be able to give a lot of a lot of readers background on the facility, that shows up in Scratch's books, where a lot of things happen there. And kind of talk about Cerberus too, because there's a lot going on in the background with Cerberus that Colin isn't aware of, simply because his stories are told obviously from first person. So he doesn't know everything. It's not third person omniscient. So you don't know what's going on in Agent Mendoza's mind. And there's a lot going on there that Colin isn't aware of that I think I can have fun playing with and give readers a little bit more, kind of broaden their perspective on the world beneath in Colin's world.
Oh, I'm excited. Thank you, sir.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. All right. Anybody else have any questions? Anybody else want to jump in with anything before we close this out? All right. Now I'll let Kaylee jump back in here, and I think we'll end the talk.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for doing this. I appreciate you inviting me to do this. I think we actually planned this like way back when the pandemic started, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So good. Well, I'm very happy that you had me do this. This was a good opportunity.
Absolutely. Hopefully we'll be able to have this in person next time.
Certainly. Yeah. That would be nice, right? I would love to do that. Although, all my readers from across, the globe, I guess, couldn't attend, but I mean, maybe we can do it, as a Zoom then as well. So, and I want to thank everybody for showing up today. I know that I put out I kind of, shared this with you on short notice. So I think, those of you that took time out of your day to show up today and chat with me, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, everybody, have a good day.